Yo, what's cracking, folks? Welcome to episode number 26 of the Painter the Pixie.
Yes.
Yeah, we're halfway
Midpoint
through the year.
Yeah, so cool.
Not midway through the show. We definitely want to do it more than a year. I'm just saying, it's like 26.
Well, we were going to do a year, so this is half.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Pretty solid.
Awesome. It was a pretty good episode to be the midway point, too.
It was. And side note, I'm your host, Jeremy Vassar. This is your other host, Serina Vassar.
Hi, everyone.
Howdy. And in this episode of the podcast, I talk about this in the beginning of the show as well, but a lot of folks really liked the episode we did with my dad, talking about relational integrity and the relational integrity spectrum, and we are taking the show in a more of that type of direction.
Yeah,
so we're
relational health, mental health,
communication skills, a lot of relationship stuff,
be awesome.
And kind of laying the groundwork to how to have, healthy relationships, not relationships, as Dane Cook used to say.
That's a good one.
So in this episode of the podcast, we're talking about brain states.
Yeah.
This is the first episode in a two-part episode. We're gonna talk about just in this one we're presenting the brain state. So what is a brain state? What are they? What are they? Why do they exist? How do they work? All that stuff. And then in the next episode, we're going to be talking about how to regulate your brain in a more optimal, healthy way, and how to kind of get yourself out of a bad spot into a good spot, and how to stay in a good spot and not get into a bad spot.
Yeah.
So,
It's a pretty good episode. I think you guys will really like it.
Yeah. So without further ado, please enjoy episode number 26 of The Painter and the Pixie.
This is only the beginning.
All right, ready?
Ready?
What you're going to hear about today is nothing short of a miracle.
Well, I don't believe it.
Let's find out. Ready, set, go.
Yo, what's up, girl?
Hi, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're actually recording at a reasonable time.
I know, it's amazing.
It's
I
the
could
morning.
still say good morning.
You can. That's official. We had, I guess last week's episode we did popular diets.
Yeah, that was fun.
But the week before that we had my dad on.
Yeah.
And talked about all kinds of stuff and
relationships
and so forth. And he went over some of his relational integrity spectrum, that kind of stuff, and we got a fair amount of response.
Yeah, a lot of positive feedback.
So thank you, everybody, for your feedback. And Serena and I have been chatting in the weeks in between and even leading up to that we wanted to start doing some shows that have a little bit more meat on the bone, as it were. So it's some information that Serena and I both have access to and have been interacting with for quite some time because of who we know and the circles we roll in, and through our connections with Lakeside and my dad, your counseling background, and we know some good people in the field, and I really do think that even guys from my fight gym really responded to that episode. So because everybody has relationships, it's not really taught well. It's not a concept that's taught a lot, and I guess my a lot of the things we've talked about and going over our content plan and kind of what we want to be going over in the future is really giving people a lot of actionable intelligence that matters, and that's helpful. We're not trying to counsel anyone, or that is impossible to do over a podcast. And we're not taking not overstepping our bounds as far as what this medium can do, but we can raise awareness for a lot of these concepts and
offer insight and some frameworks that people maybe have never heard of before.
Right.
Which is really helpful. Sometimes you can kind of work through some of your own things if you have a context with which to understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
Kind of like when we were talking about relationships a couple of weeks ago, right? A lot of people didn't even know, relational integrity, what is that? I never even thought about intentionally building that type of structure with someone that I'm in a relationship with.
Right.
So that alone is massively powerful, helpful to move people in a very healthy direction.
Yeah, and it was something I was telling you right before we started recording, is that I really would, it made a big difference in my life when I started viewing social skills and relationship skills as skills.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
as soon as you say something is a skill, it means you can practice and get better at it. And I think that there's, a misconception that there is, you're kind of born with it, or it's like an innate talent to have relational skills. And it's like, no, you can, you really can develop them. There are some people, for whatever reason, they might be more empathetic or have just a better social IQ, so they can maneuver the waters of the social realms a little bit easier. But I think it's really important to know that these are skills. These are things that once you have a framework, you can start honing that framework and really being conscious of it, working through it. It's something I've gotten better at, hopefully, over the years. I've never been married before, so it's like just working through stuff like that. There's lots of like things you can do and tools you can have in your toolbox. And we know people like Diane Wagenhals and my dad that are great at presenting some of those things. And we're going to be kind of diving more into those. Yeah, I'm very excited for that. So it'll be good. Very and I think you find listeners at home will be enjoying some of where we're taking the show. So in the spirit of that, we are this will be part one of a two-part. Our first two-part episode. First two-parter here. We're going to talk about brain states. I'm going to let Serina. You have done this. I've talked about it a lot. Yes. More than me, particularly recently. I've taught it, many years ago. But you're definitely. You present. This is something you present in a nutritional, kind of way to your clients, and I guess I'll just pass the reins over to you as you present, because you're pretty dialed in on this. So, and just for those listening, the first episode we're gonna keep it just to the actual states of the brain. And, what are brain states? What's the science behind them, and so forth. And then in the next episode, we're going to talk about how to regulate your brain in a more optimal, healthy way, and kind of what that looks like, and then what that looks like in a practical sense. Yeah. So like things Serina and I do, things I've developed over the years, and that. All that, we'll talk more about that in the second episode too. Yeah. So onward. Yes. So I will pass the baton of conversation over to Serina, you can kind of go through your deal, and I will do my best to you're familiar too. Feel free to chime in. I've presented this structure many times before. So the process of brain states, the concept of brain states, was really popularized by Dr. Bruce Perry. And I have one of his books right here, which you've read before. This is called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog and Other Stories from a Child Psychiatrist's Notebook. So Dr. Bruce Perry is a child psychiatrist, very well thought of, well renowned, and has developed a lot of really great strategies to help children who grow into adults recover from traumas. Yeah. Right? Whether that's something like being in a car accident, or like the title of the book suggests, there was a child who was raised as a dog. There was a mentally handicapped, or I don't know if I'm allowed to say mentally handicapped, a challenged adult who was taking care of this child. He ended up with the child inadvertently. The mother of the child had died, and he took care of it, but he had never had a child before, never was around children, had a lot of dogs, and he just treated the boy like a dog. Yep. He didn't know, which is quite sad. But so like in a dog cage and dog food and these things that were just, not at all appropriate for a child. Then Dr. Bruce Perry came into the picture and took care of this child and kind of worked his way through by helping him to regulate his brain. So like I said, we talked about the categories of brain state regulation of brain states. There are 5 main brain states that you're in at any one point in time. Right? And Jeremy, you said this before we started recording, and I want to illustrate that here too. There's a reason for each of these brain states. Right. Yeah. Our brains developed to help us to survive through the wild, right? Through living as hunter-gatherers and in modern America, or not just America, modern world, modern society. So these brain states help us in some way. So let's talk about, what are these brain states? If you guys ever read the book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, there's a lovely chart in the back, page 249. And I will say too, just for people that don't know who Bruce Perry is, he's like the Michael Jordan of like child psychology, early childhood development, and like, I think he handled the Waco case. Yeah, with those you're right. There. I did not give him a good introduction. He's like a huge deal. Like, amazing. I know the world of trauma and stuff is not, like uber mainstream, but like Bruce Perry's a stud. Diane's a big fan. She's a fellowship
Yeah.
with him. Bruce,
A fellow.
Yeah, it's like an academic term.
Yeah.
But anyway, the dude's a champ. And this book particularly is, if anyone is interested in kind of dipping your toe in the world of what trauma is and early childhood trauma and what that does
And
to
brain
someone and brain
development.
development, all that stuff. This is the book I direct everybody to. So, but anyway,
Me too.
I just want to give one little caveat.
Yeah,
just to,
perfect.
Anyway, sorry.
And he was the founder of the CTA, the Childhood Trauma Academy, and basically which teaches other health professionals to help children who've been traumatized, and it has this great big framework for a lot of really positive things for kids. And like I said, kids grow up into being adults. So this is, some people think about this process if they've read the book and they think, oh, it's just children. No, we used to all be children at some point in time.
Yep, everybody went through it. So
Everybody went through it. And the whole process of understanding the brain states and regulation, when we get to that in part two, is understanding how your brain has developed, how it was wired, and how you can rewire it after experiencing stressful situations.
Right.
So what are the brain states? There are 5 brain states. The titles that Dr. Perry gives them are calm, alert, alarmed, fear, and terror. So calm, if you want to picture it, is kind of the top of the brain. Calm, cool, collected, creative. I like to think about it as being creative. So it's really easy to kind of imagine into the future. Each of these different types of brain states offers your body, your physical capacity to think into the future differently.
Right.
Right? Does that make sense?
Your the time window is large. Is
changed.
You can project into the future the furthest and the most accurately in the calm state, and then it
Right,
kind
the
of
higher you are in the
kind of
brain.
digresses as you move down the spectrum there.
Yes. So in the calm brain state, the highest brain state, you have the ability to imagine, to think about things far into the future. You can say, oh yeah, well, say you're not even dating anybody right now, but you can imagine that at your 50-year wedding anniversary, you want to go to Aruba and hang out on the beach. Like, you have the capacity to do those things and have kind of mental play, if you will, and be creative.
Abstract thought.
Abstract thought. That
Yeah.
is what I'm looking for. Yes. Abstract thought happens in the calm part of your brain. The next step down, the second brain state, which Bruce Perry calls alert, is more concrete. So it's very black and white. Things are, they are not. I am right, you are wrong.
No gray space.
There's no gray space whatsoever.
Yeah, things when you go into that space, things no longer exist on a continuum. It's very, as you said, black and white.
Very
So,
black and white.
yeah.
Your ability to imagine into the future is shortened to days or hours. Very short. It's not a long time frame.
Yeah.
So if you think about that from step 1 to step 2, that's a huge reduction of your ability to project into the future. Right? If you're in the calm state, it's limitless. You can think forever, imagine forever. And when you drop down one step to concrete, you can think only days and hours. So the state right below that, the middle brain state, is alarm. And that part of the brain that we're dealing with is your limbic system. That's your midbrain.
Okay.
And when you're here, you're highly emotional. Highly emotional. So if you've ever been in an argument with someone and you've said something that you don't mean, or you're just angry, you're yelling, or you could just cry at the drop of a pin. I'm so mad. I don't know why I'm mad. I'm just crying, or what have you. You're limbic, totally limbic. Your brain is stuck in that very emotional center, and your ability to imagine into the future is only hours or minutes.
Yeah, you're just kind of riding the waves of your emotions
Yep.
at that point. Yeah.
Yep. You're at the whim of your emotions.
Yep.
So if you've ever been in an argument, because a lot of people have been in this situation, and you kind of come back to you reflect upon it later and you say, oh, I didn't mean to say that. Oh, I really shouldn't have said that. Oh, it's because at the time you said the things that you thought would help you feel less emotional. That's all your brain cares about, is feeling less bad.
Right.
You don't
right.
have the ability to project hours and days into the future. If I say this mean thing, it's going to negatively impact my relationship because your time frame is shortened in that moment.
Yep.
Then we move one step lower in the brain to fear. Fear is where we are in our brain stem. That's the region of the brain that we're dealing with. And your ability to think into the future is minutes or seconds. It's significantly shortened. Here, we're basically reactive, right? So if something happens, we react. There's no really sense of planning what you're going to say or premeditating what you're going to do. It's just a matter of reacting to an external stimuli.
Yeah.
You can also be very emotional here, but as the name implies, fear is where you've kind of got more of this intensity, almost not quite life or death situation. Like, I have got to make sure that I do the right thing to survive.
Right.
Right? The lowest part of the brain is the terror center. That is in our brain stem. When we're down here in the low part of our brain, we have no sense of time.
Yep.
So the analogy I always like to use is if you watch movies and like the car's rolling and the person in the car is just like almost standing still. Time is standing still.
I've done that.
I know you have.
Probably bring that story in later.
Yeah. Your sense of time is nothing.
Yeah.
That moment lasts forever. Your body is reflexive. Whatever you can possibly do, whatever your muscle memory can possibly do to keep you alive in that moment, it's going to do.
Yeah.
No sense of time.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about that too. I mean, sorry, I don't want to
Go ahead.
interrupt. I was just saying, like, you can get into some of these states in a positive way. Like
Yeah.
a flow state is also a state where time dissipates, and you're in that moment, but you're not in that. You're not in a terror space.
Right.
So it's interesting how the brain's. It's an interesting setup.
Yeah, well, and I think sometimes, I've thought about that too. I think sometimes that flow state where you really lose all sense of time, but it's a very positive, creative outflow.
Yeah.
I think you're still in the calm space.
Yeah.
You just
yeah.
don't have it's no sense of time because there's no cap on anything. You're not worried about the time that's passing.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, can I touch on some of the brain states?
Yeah,
stuff? Are you still
absolutely.
going?
Go for it.
I just want to touch on, you mentioned the limbic system, and I just wanted to say, like,
Yeah, let's talk about that.
with each state, there are, and I'm not a neuroscientist, so some of this may be incorrect. I'm going to do my best.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of like bro science here. But when you're in the calmest part of your brain, there's actually a part of the brain that lights up and is the most active, which is your prefrontal cortex.
Yes. Oh, I
So,
did forget to mention that. Go for it.
It's just because in that chart, he doesn't have the associated part of the brain.
He does. Here, cortex,
Okay.
limbic midbrain, brainstem.
Okay, so then just make sure I'm right on that. So for the calm space, it's your prefrontal cortex, which
Which he calls the neocortex.
and it's also where your sense of self is.
Right.
So of like when you're thinking of like, as I'm thinking like, oh, this is Jeremy, and like who I am, that's where that resides. It's also, from an evolutionary perspective, the last part of the brain that developed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then humans
Part
have,
of what makes humans human.
and then humans by if you kind of like do it by weight and stuff, we have one of the, like, whales and stuff, their brains are enormous, but we have the largest prefrontal cortex of any species. So
Yeah.
it's our, and that's why we understand death and all these other things. But so that's your, when that's lit up the most, that's your highest ability to do abstract thinking, all that kind of stuff. As we move through that spectrum, you drop into your cortex. That's where things get it's your states of arousal. You start getting a little bit more. Your time window of projecting into the future narrows, and then is it just cortex is the next one?
Well, cortex is the second one when you're in the alert stage.
So you're just in an alert, and then limbic is your an emotional center. That's another step down.
Yeah.
And then past the limbic system, you're getting really low into like your reptilian brain.
Yeah, the very old, first
Which
developed
is-
parts of the brain.
Which is
anatomy.
all, as Serina touched on earlier, these were all systems that were developed for survival. So the reason any of us are still here is because of these very, very old systems that were developed to keep us alive. So you need all of these states to survive.
Yeah, I think that's a really good
So
point.
the issue becomes when areas of the brain get activated in inappropriate times.
Yeah, I think that's a super good point.
So
to
it's
make,
not,
for sure.
there's not, I hesitate to say like any one state is better than another state. It's just they each have a more optimal time for activation.
Yeah, they have a purpose.
They have a purpose, yeah.
And so if it's being activated incorrectly or at the wrong time, that's when we have issues.
Yeah, out of context.
Out of context,
can,
yeah.
can get you into some situations.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what happens with people who have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yeah.
is that these lower parts of the brain are being activated incorrectly. So if you've ever heard of like, someone who's been in the military for something, they are in the shopping center and they smell a perfume that they smelled when bombs were going off, and then they rush to get their children and their wife out of the store, whatever.
Yeah.
That's an appropriate response to an external stimuli. They're not in an active war zone. They're just shopping at Macy's or whatever. But they've activated that lower part of their brain very likely in the limbic system. So in the limbic system, we have two main areas that we store memories, our hippocampus and our amygdala. The amygdala is that fear response. That's where we store memories like, don't touch the stove, it's hot.
Right.
Right? Our brain knows there's danger here. If you've touched the stove when you were a kid, you learned that's hot, don't do that. Your brain stores that memory in your amygdala so that you can retrieve it in a stress situation. Now, I liked what you said a minute ago too, contrasting like stress is a positive thing in certain circumstances. We need to have that response. We need to be able to remember that the stove is hot, don't touch the stove.
Yeah.
Right? And then we have our hippocampus, which is also located in the limbic system, but the hippocampus is more just like long-term memory. That's just our library where we store information. That's our brain's Rolodex. File this here, file it under G, whatever.
Yeah, it's like the library. Yeah.
It's like the library. So when we activate our brain appropriately at appropriate times, all these brain states are useful. We need them.
Yeah.
We need to have this. When you drop low in the brain, that's where you have your reflexes are activated, right?
Yeah.
So if someone's throwing a baseball and they miss, they don't throw it directly at your palm, it's coming at your head. You want to drop down low in the brain to reflexive and catch it before it hits you.
Yeah. So, and I have an example that would walk us through all
Perfect.
of the...
Go for it.
Just to give an example of an appropriate response chain, if you will. So, I'll modernize it a little bit for our folks. I'm interested in getting eventually into bow hunting.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so because it's super hard, you can train for them with like ultra marathons and stuff. So it's right up my alley. It's super crazy hard. So let's say hypothetically, I'm out. I'm going to plan a hunting trip. Okay, so now I've got all my gear. I've planned it out. I've been in my prefrontal cortex thinking
Very
abstractly
creative,
of like, what are the things that I need? I've done research. I've developed my skills. I've been practicing archery for, probably over a year every day. So I've got some good active skills and things I can call on. I've been talking to other hunters and doing all these things. So now it's ready to go, and I'm going to go on a solo hunt, which is probably ill-advisable, but just for the
Perfect for this
sake of
analogy.
this analogy. Now, I am going to drive my truck to, maybe public lands or a private property I could hunt on, got all the permissions and everything. And now I'm starting to walk the woods. I'm way off the trailhead now. I'm in the woods with my bow, and I'm walking. I'm like a little more alert because I don't know if I've quite done this.
Yeah, you're perfect. You're right in alert.
So my senses are a little more dialed in. Olfactory senses are a little more activated. I'm a little more sensitive to things around me. I'm mindful of all the noise. Very alert. So as I'm moving through the woods, I'm looking around. I'm smelling. I'm trying to know where I'm trying to use my limited skills that I have listening for what's going on. Now I get deeper and deeper into the woods. It's been a couple hours now, and then I hear a rustle in the bushes. Now it's like, okay, now I'm a little more alert. It's and I had something where like it startled me.
Yeah,
so I'm actually,
you might be in alarm now.
I'm in alarm. Like I got into limbic. I'm feeling a little like unsettled, and it's more of like a chuffing sound, like, and that's not a deer.
Yeah, that's not a deer.
Oh shit. And then as I
see, and that's when, to illustrate, that's limbic. Emotional, a little bit of fear coming, a little bit of stress, a little bit of anxiety. This isn't a deer. What is this? I don't know.
Yeah. And so then as I'm moving through, I see a rustle in the bushes. And then now I not only do I have a sense of it through my like hearing it, now I've got a visual of, oh no, so now I have acquired a threat, potential threat.
Yeah. Something is there.
Yeah. And then
So are you in fear at that moment? I think you're in fear at that moment because you're in minutes and seconds. You're only concerned about what's happening right in front of you.
You're getting close.
Yeah.
Now in this example, we'll say I didn't have a sidearm, so I just have my bow, which I'm probably not that great at the moment. But like, maybe you knock an arrow or something. But the lower you get in your brainstem, the less access to your skills you have. I just know that from a martial arts setting.
You become reflexive and reactive.
Which is
reflexive is what you've trained over and over again.
Yeah, which is why fighters in the cage, you really want to have trained these skills so that you can then, when you get in these lower states, you still have access to all these things you've drilled into your body because your body has memory too. So then a big grizzly bear emerges, and it's like, oh shit. Mm-hmm. So
you're definitely in fear at that moment.
That's in the terror spot.
That's definitely terror. You're no sense of time. Like, oh my gosh, is this thing going to maul me?
Yeah. So that's something. And then the terror spot would be, then I would fight for my life.
Yeah, fight or flight.
If it was actually, if it actually charged me and came at me, chances are I'm gonna die. But like that would be, dude. Grizzly bears are monsters. They're like they can be over 1,000 pounds. Yeah. So, but like maybe I hit it with an arrow and run or be able to wound it or whatever.
Yeah, so fight or flight. You're reactive at that moment.
But then that terror is that animalistic instinct to survive is what's going to get me out of that or give me the best chance to survive it. Yeah. Now let's just put the same exact situation. I see the rustle in the bushes. I knock an arrow, and then a little bunny jumps out, and it was just a rabbit.
Yeah,
and you're like, huh! and then, but you're like, oh, thank God. And then your brain will regulate out. You had all the appropriate responses, but the threat was not actually a threat. Yeah, and then now you get to be more cognitive. And where a lot of people end up is in a metaphorical sense that we always think that there's a bear in the bushes. A lot of times it's a bunny, but we still think it's a bear. And like there's so many of these threats now, and I mean that's like negative comments on social media. There's
traffic.
There's so many things that trigger that rustle in the bushes that like in modern society that we're still trying to develop ways to combat, because they're threats that are not there. It's not a spider, it's not a snake, it's not the lower brain was very good at dealing with like things that were going to kill you.
Yeah.
and now a lot of times the brain's a little overstimulated and we think there's a lot of things that are going to kill us. So a lot of people walk around in a state of like kind of anxiety, hypervigilance, because it's like, everyone's like super jumpy because there's all these things rustling in the bushes. But most of the time,
some of them are not real.
Most of the time, it's just a little bunny, or nothing at all. So, and I think that's the chain of sequence in your brain that would save you in that scenario. But
if it were a true threat,
right? And there's a lot less grizzly bears bumping around than your brain is almost giving you a lot of like. It's the boy who cried wolf. It's a lot of like false signals. And then you get kind of, you touched on it as you talked about Bruce Perry. He's big on early childhood development. We talk about brain equilibrium, right? That's something we're going to be talking about probably right now. But your brain can get, as you develop as a child, where you normalize your brain, it can actually be lower in your brain than in your cognitive prefrontal space. Yeah. A lot of people normalize, limbic.
Right. So let me just rephrase this and make sure I'm tracking with you.
Okay.
So as you're developing as a child, you might end up basically having your normal be, I'm always looking for a rustle in the bush. As opposed to I'm just walking around and hunting and just enjoying the woods. You think that all the time there's something rustling, so you have to be on alert all the time.
Yeah, particularly if you have early childhood trauma, your maybe a better phrase would be like your default setting. Your default wiring will put you in a hypervigilant space, which would be you're in a higher state of alertness more of the time, which there's also a biological reason for that, because you have they've done studies where mothers who were pregnant during wartime, the kids came out and the babies came out from the jump a little more hardwired for alertness, a little more like wary of things and a little more aggressive, because if you're born into wartime, you've got to be a little bit more on your game. You can't be as relaxed. So and a lot of times it's through no fault of the people that have experienced any of this stuff. It's just how,
biology is working
through traumas or whatever. You normalize, and then your equilibrium gets set in this limbic state versus, what would serve you better would perhaps be being wired where your equilibrium is more in your prefrontal, that abstract space. Like that's normal to me, where someone else is, my normal is limbic.
Right.
And that's where kind of we're
Right.
trying to just even making, I don't even know how many people know that that's like a thing. That
Yeah,
can
a lot of
happen.
people don't know that, and I think that's useful to point out. Oh, another thing I think would be useful to mention is that any person at any point in time can go up and down through these brain states in an instant. You can go from totally calm, cool, collected prefrontal cortex down to the bottom of your brain in a moment.
Right.
In a moment. You can also go back up in a moment. So with your analogy, you see the little bunny hop out. As soon as something jumps out of those bushes, you're in terror.
Right.
As soon as that, you don't know what it's going to be. Then you see the bunny and you regulate. You get your brain to be more calm. You say, just a rabbit, just a bunny. No way is that thing ever going to kill me. I'm fine. And you go right back up to calm. Or if you're hunting, you're probably back at alert.
Yeah. Well, my brother has a very active startle response.
Yeah, he does.
And I scare the shit out of him probably 3 times a week at work.
Regularly.
Yeah. And it's him and I work together every day on these job sites. So, but yeah, I'll totally know. I'll just walk by the room and then just say something, and he'll be like, ugh! Like, so it's, but like as soon as once he gets past his startle, he's like, oh, it's Jerp, and then he's like, he's right back to where he needs to be.
Yep, right back in the prefrontal cortex.
But as far as like in a moment, he's going from, oh, I'm just painting this thing, to terrified, to then back down to like, everything's fine. It's just my brother for the 100th time. So
right, like, dude, this happens 3 times a week. Understand that this is the pattern.
It's something I enjoy thoroughly, though. So I often encourage it.
Yeah.
Sorry, and I think you're still in your. Are you mid spiel with your?
Well, I just wanted to say you can go up and down in the brain really easily, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode. How do you do that? That's a super important skill to develop. But I think it's really good to understand the brain states to begin with. What is the purpose? Which one am I in? Just noticing yourself, what part of the brain you're in, is super helpful.
Yep.
So, like you said, kind of using your Woods analogy, just checking in with yourself and understanding that there's an appropriate response. If something is going on where traffic is a good example. If you're driving and then all of a sudden you're on the highway driving 70 miles an hour, you see brake lights, you have to go into that stress response. You have to drop low enough in the brain to be reflexive to say, I got to hit the brakes.
Right.
Make sure I don't crash into this car in front of me, rather than being in daydream la la land. Like, you have to become more focused.
Yeah.
So, yeah. To recap, brain states. Top one's calm. You're in the cortex, prefrontal cortex. Next one is alert. You are in the cortex as opposed to prefrontal cortex. Next one down is alarm. That's your limbic system. Highly emotional. Ability to think in the future is quite limited. Next one down is fear. That's your that's your brain stem, or midbrain rather. And then at the bottom of the brain is the brain stem. That's the terror center.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's and I think we actually have time to touch on a few more kind of tendrils of the brain state stuff I really thank you, by the way, for presenting you're welcome. I'm happy to talk. I love talking about this. I think I work with a lot of my clients from a nutritional perspective, because maybe I can bring this in here from a nutritional perspective, because a lot of people who come to me with blood sugar dysregulation, where they have, like, between meals they feel shaky or lightheaded, or they get hangry. This wonderful term, hangry, which is a mixture between hungry and angry, for those who may not be familiar with the term. Yeah. Hangry has become so prevalent in our society because we have a society that's constantly blood sugar dysregulated. They don't have a steady blood sugar. So when you become hangry, what happens in the body is stress hormones are released from your adrenals. Then you have a stress response by the body. You automatically drop down into a limbic state. That's why you're hangry. You're angry. You're emotional. You get snappy. You get frustrated. Right? Snickers does a great job of making fun of this exact prolific problem in our society. Hungry? You're not yourself when you're hungry. Grab a Snickers. Yep. Right? They're capitalizing on that process so well. But what your brain thinks is, I'm limbic. It drops down automatically into your limbic system. You don't have to be hunting and have the rustle in the bushes to go down to that part of your brain. You could just be hungry. Your blood sugar might just be not balanced. Eating food brings your blood sugar back up, your stress hormones go back down, and now you're regulated. Right? I have a lot of people who come to me and they say this phrase, and this phrase is a really common phrase that I think is just, it's common, but it's not accurate. I'm an emotional eater. Yes.
right? A
Yes.
lot of people say, I'm an emotional eater. And I say, no, you're just trying to regulate your brain. You don't know that you're just trying to regulate your brain. It has nothing to do with food. I've got people who say, well, I grew up eating all these sweets and candies and cakes and chocolates and cookies, and so that's what I do. I'm used to that. And I say, well, but there's something you can do outside of food to make your brain feel better.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's why I teach this to my clients, because sometimes it has to do with food. A lot of the times it doesn't have to do with food. It has to do with the fact that the food is what you're using to do regulation,
Yeah.
to bring your brain back up to a higher brain space.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah. I have so many good examples, and then I'm like, I kind of want to save them for the next episode.
Okay, let's save them. Let's hold on to them.
But I'll do one more because we've touched on this a couple times. I don't think I've ever told this on the show.
Yes, tell the story. That's a great idea. I know what you're getting at.
Yeah, when I was 16, I had my license for 3 weeks, and I will break this story down in terms of brain states, so we can kind of see. This will be probably
Real
maybe
life example.
a little bit better than my fake hunting example.
Oh, that was a good one.
But so I was 16. I was working as a it's not really security. It was I would open up the facilities at Lakeside for groups that would rent out the facility. So like family picnics, and it's their main campus. So they have like a gym and a pool and a big field and all that stuff. So surveillance is what we called it.
Okay.
Where I would go but you had to be there to open up for these folks. And I was never late. I was always very punctual. I'd been working for Lakeside since I was 13. So it was like,
You knew the drill.
I knew the drill. I wasn't like an irresponsible. Well, I was foolish, but not irresponsible. So then I had just gotten my license 3 weeks prior, and I had been driving my mom's car, which was a 04 Grand Am GT. This car was like a month old.
Oh no.
And it's a very quick car. If anyone remembers that car, it's front wheel drive. It was pretty speedy. It was like 180 horsepower, but like super light. And I was like, oh shit. And my mom was out of town, so I kind of had
Why
free
were you
reign.
like, oh shit?
Oh, sorry. I woke up that morning and I had overslept.
Oh.
And I was late. I was already late. Like there was no
good.
way I was making it on time. Thankfully, one of the other janitors was there and was able to open up the facility.
And it was unlike you to have been
It was unusual. So
waking up late.
I panicked. I changed.
What part of the brain were you in?
So you wake up and you're in that groggy space when you wake up in the morning, and then I look at the clock and it was an immediate like, oh no. And I was
panic, you're in fear.
I was probably like limbic, like, oh no, but then it dropped lower.
Yeah.
And I was in more of like a panic. I need to get there right now.
Yeah, that's a fear state.
So very, very like fearful, and got my shit, jumped in my mom's car and took off. And when I say took off, I took off.
Yeah.
Like I was flying. So I was cruising down 152 and just hammering down. It's
gosh.
like 9 o'clock in the morning. It had rained the night before,
no.
and there was some leaves and stuff on the road. And then I was hauling ass. And then what that also does is, now that I'm speeding, my brain's even more alert.
Yep.
Because
Things are moving
as
faster.
I
You gotta
touched
pay more
on from the traffic book, the faster you're traveling as a human, generally the more alert you get. You have to really train yourself to be calm in those
So you're totally
spaces.
limbic and fear. You're bouncing between those two.
Limbic, fear, dialed in, and also as a 16-year-old, nothing ever bad happened to me in a car, so I was just like, I'm invincible. And I had no concept of like consequence, I guess. And so I hit a space where there's a little valley, and down the valley I pinned it, like it was the pedal to the floor.
Oh my
I hit
gosh.
about like maybe like 85 miles an hour at the bottom of this hill. And then at the top of the hill, I kept the hammer down, and there's a little S curve at the top of this hill. And as I came up the hill, still hammered down all the way, there's no one on the road. And I hit probably close to 90 miles an hour when I came around this curve. And as I came around the curve, I turned the wheel to the right, and it's a dead stick, which means that the car there was no...
Turn the wheel and nothing happened.
There was no response from the car when I turned the wheel.
Yeah.
It just kept going straight on this curve. And that moment where I turned the wheel at 90 and it just stayed straight. When I think about that, I have like, that's so ingrained in my like somatic memory where
which means physical memory.
That feeling of your just stomach dropping out was like, it was a complete loss of control.
Well, you were in terror. You dropped right into terror.
Yeah, that was the moment of terror.
Yeah, that was the moment.
Everything else before then was like kind of this almost euphoric speed, just emotion, like just like tactile feel of the speed, just super, super dialed in. And then as soon as I turned that wheel and nothing happened, and I was like, oh, I'm going to die. I lost it. And
I might die.
I don't know if I didn't know that consciously. It was just like, this is bad.
Yeah.
And so then as the car continues forward, it went through probably like 10 or 20 yards of shrubs. It might have been less than that, maybe like 10 yards, because this is where I went into the time warp of like things slowed way, way down for me. And then I remember the undercarriage of the car getting scraped by like sticks and stuff and foliage. And then there was this gnarly tree that was on the side of this hill, this embankment. And keep in mind that the car had gone, I went across both lanes of traffic. So I was...
Because it didn't turn around the turn. It just went straight.
The curve went to the right and then back to the left. So it just went straight across. So then the front left tire hit this tree, and then that pitched the car in the air and barrel rolled it left over right. And I still remember as it hit the tree, that's when the airbag hit. And those things are not downy soft.
No, they're not.
They're not like the commercial where it's like a gentle, it's an explosion.
Yeah.
So so that hit me right in the eyes because that's
right
where,
in your face. That's
where
what it's supposed to do.
you.
Keep you from hitting the dashboard.
So there was a moment where I lost vision, but I think that was more of me blinking from the explosion coming out. And then as the car pitched, I was in the air for, it seemed like an unnecessary amount of time.
Seemed like a long time because you were in terror and you lose sense of time.
And then it landed on the roof in the left lane going the wrong way.
Oh my gosh.
And then I slid on the roof for like 50 yards or something.
Oh my gosh.
And then when I reopened my eyes, I'm still have my hands on the wheel and I'm watching the road go by, but it's like I'm upside down.
Yeah.
And then finally the car came to rest. And then also in an accident like that, so I'm like, that was full blast terror. And then when the car came to rest, there was still panic because I was in a very low space in my brain still, because then there's smoke in the air.
Yeah.
And I'm in an upside down car, and we see the movies. Those always explode. Yeah. So, but it was the smoke from
dust from the airbag, right?
The airbags actually got explosive in it. That's the only way it comes out.
I know.
So I had burn marks on my face.
Yeah.
But it's actually like a little bit of dynamite in there that they just like it.
Yeah,
that's what
blasted out.
So, but there was what I thought was smoke, but it was actually just kind of this particulate from the explosion of the airbag. So then I unhook my seatbelt. That put me on the roof.
Yeah, you're down, falling down.
And I could not get my door open because the front left tire came through the car and was where the brake should be, so it wedged the door shut. But thankfully, the passenger side window had shattered.
Thankfully.
Due to events previously described. And then I crawled out of the passenger side window and then scrambled across the road.
You ran away in case the car explodes.
Yeah, well, because
and you run.
Yeah, well, and I just
all those stress hormones.
And then I scrambled across and I got it, and then I remember turning around in the grass and looking back at the car, which, just keep in mind, it's up kind of on the roof, but like also teetering on the front tires. The back wheels are like still spinning.
Oh my gosh.
And then I was like, I can't believe that just happened. And all I remember doing is like patting my arms and my legs because it was so crazy.
Yeah. Like, are they still there?
Is everything still working? Yeah. And then, gradually my brain started to like work itself
slightly back up. But you're still in limbic. You way you got higher than limbic.
No, I was rattled. And then this like my last vivid memory of that is that a dude in an Altima. This is before cell phones, by the way. I did not. I mean, they existed.
But you didn't have one.
I did not have one. This dude in an Altima came by looked at the car that's upside down. Clearly, I'm the person
who was in the
car. And then he looks at me, looks at the car, and then just keeps driving.
What?
It didn't stop at all. I was like,
my
what?
gosh.
But then the next guy stopped.
I can't believe that.
And
That's
then
awful.
they called one of the neighbors who had heard the commotion, called the ambulance. And, it was, I was fine, by the way.
Yeah, amazing.
But that's the brain state. I mean, in that amount of adrenaline and everything that got blasted, I didn't I did not go to work today or go to work that day. And, but
Mom's brand new car.
yeah.
Amazing that you didn't have any injuries.
No injuries, and it was because I was wearing my seatbelt, and also I didn't. The way that I hit that tree, I was very fortunate that it wasn't just an abrupt stop.
Right, that it rolled.
It actually
absorbed that momentum.
It used the momentum, launched it into the air, and then I gradually came to a stop as it was sliding on the roof. I was also very fortunate there was no other cars coming, so I was a huge dumbass. It was a huge mistake, and but it was that was a really irrational. I was never in a cognitive space.
The whole time.
The correct reaction to that would be like, okay, I'm late. I'll call the janitors there, making sure
make sure somebody else can open the door, and I'll get there when I get there.
And then I will at a reasonable pace. I will get there when I'm that would you're also 16 and dumb, and I can do this, and so it's all good. But
well, and you had the reputation of being totally responsible, so not showing up, oversleeping, which was highly unlike you, ruins your reputation. You're like, I don't want to ruin my reputation, or there's some aspects of that too. So thanks for sharing that. I've heard that so many times, but I still get goosebumps every time you tell that. That's like, you could have just died. You really could have totally died in that experience.
What's funny about it too is that a couple things resulted from that. One was I was a much more responsible driver after that. Yeah. But then I also knew, I was like, oh, I'm like a superhero. Like, nothing can kill me, which is a total 16-year-old, like I can do it, that kind of a thing. But
now let's talk about this for a moment. So you have so many clear details about that story. That's as I was listening, I was realizing every time you tell this, it's so vivid and clear. And for our listeners, that's because it was a traumatic event.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about how your brain encodes memories. You stored that memory in your amygdala. Your amygdala is that stress response place where you store all of those things, right? Yeah. So you learn, don't do that again. Don't touch the hot oven. Don't take this turn at 90 miles an hour. Right?
Yeah. My dad had such a side note. I just want to give props to my parents. They were incredibly gracious and kind. And it was one of like 2 times I think I ever saw my dad tear up. Gosh. He didn't cry. He teared up though. And that's when he, sorry, I know you were talking about your thing. I'll do a couple more details and then we'll come back. When you're below 18, they just take you to the hospital when something like that happens. So you don't, you can't waive your right unless you're not a minor, I guess. So I called my dad on a guy's cell phone that stopped. And then I was like, Dad, I flipped Mom's car. And he's like, what? He's like, where are you? I'm like, I'm by Pleasantville Church. He's like, how'd you get there so fast? I'm like, I'm like, I was definitely moving. Yeah. And then when he came, they had already taken me to the hospital. So when he showed up, he only saw the car like flipped. It looked horrific. It looked horrible. But it's all good. And got my mom a new car and everything was fine.
And she was on vacation, right?
I paid the insurance stuff, and thankfully we had good insurance. So everything worked out. We got my mom a much slower car. It was also very nice the following Monday, and they made me drive her new car to work that Monday night. So it was like that happened on Saturday morning, and I was back driving on Monday.
So that you would not be afraid of it.
And I didn't get punished. They're like, yeah, you learned your lesson.
Yeah, I think so.
Do that again. So,
oh my gosh.
But yeah, sorry. Back to the brain state stuff. I just want to make sure everyone it was fine.
Yeah, it worked out good. Yeah. Well, and when you talk about it, even you drop lower in the brain. Like you are creative, but you still have I'm sure you still have some of those little tinglies. Like you can feel that because of how your brain encoded that memory. And I love talking about this with my clients too, because sometimes I've had people who say, well, why can't I just get this? Why can't I just make this change? Or why can't I? What's wrong with me? Is that under the subtext of that.
Right.
And I try to explain that nothing's wrong with you. Your brain has been trying to help you. If you probably still think about that every time you drive that road.
Sometimes the thing is, one, my parents were super, and my dad is who he is, so it was really, I had a lot of people to process it with, and I've told that story so many times that I've assimilated into my narrative, so I don't really have a traumatic response to it anymore, unless I really...
Okay, so maybe you used to.
I used to, for sure.
Yes.
Sure.
So
it was sensitive.
To stick with my analogy, you had that memory. You've had a lot of really good help from people to re-encode that. The illustration I'm trying to make is you can move it from your amygdala, move that memory, the traumatic event memory, from your amygdala to your hippocampus.
Yeah.
You can make that shift. It just takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because memories that were so stressful gets put there rightfully to keep you safe, right? They put those memories in that amygdala to keep you safe. Over time, and you've worked with a lot of really helpful people, professionals who, and your dad who's like, that's a great support for you because you've got that father-son relationship, and he's very good at what he does to help people re-regulate and rewire those memories.
Right.
Move it from the amygdala to the hippocampus, where now you can engage with that and you're not in fear mode. You're not right back down to the bottom of your brain having told the story.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So a lot of people who kind of hit walls and with sticking points, it's not necessarily because, man, you don't have enough willpower or what's wrong with you. Nothing like that. It's how's your brain responding? What's the brain neurochemistry, neurobiology that's going on here? Let's rewire that. Let's work through this in a new way so that you can have a different response, so that you don't have to relive this memory each time you drive on this S curve of the road.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that takes time, and that's a process, but it's encouraging because you can do it.
Yeah.
You can get there. A lot of people, you can get there. And part of what we're going to talk about in episode 2 here is how do you do that? How do you begin to rewire these things? How do you begin to regulate your brain through this process? It's a super phenomenal skill to have, but it's definitely a skill like you were talking about with these relationship aspects. It's something you have to practice, repetition over time, so that when you get into those stress moments, you can reflexively engage with those materials, right? Reflexively move into regulating your brain properly.
Yeah. And I think too, there's predictive, once you start thinking about things like this with the brain states, you'll start to become aware of when your brain's going to drop into a less desirable state. And it's somewhat predictive. Like you can't always predict, like if a tiger just showed up out of nowhere and started jacking people, like you're going to be like, oh man, but that doesn't happen very often. So it's
right. But if you know, for example, I think if I'm tracking with you, if you know, I always feel stress around my in-laws or my parents or whatever, that's a lot of common thing people feel.
Yeah.
You know that you can start predicting ahead of time to say, okay, when I go to visit my in-laws, when I go to visit my parents or whatever, I'm going to have a plan in place to do regulation, to make sure as much as I possibly can, hey, you predict, you say, if this person does this, I'm going to be able to respond like that. Or this person's very likely to say mean things, criticize me on this, whatever it is. And you can give yourself a plan of action so that you can practice those skills and use those skills in action so that you feel more calm, you feel more in control, you feel more collected and capable of interacting with your brain from a, what's the word you used before? What's the creative? You used a great word. Abstract.
Hey, all right.
From an abstract perspective, and with using your hippocampus to store memories rather than your amygdala.
Yeah.
Because when you drop down low in the brain, your body says we must be in a really dangerous situation. Start storing these memories over here in the alarm system, the amygdala, rather than in the hippocampus.
Yeah, and then when memories get encoded lower down in the brain, they're almost always... I don't know how much we want to get into that, but like it's more
stressful, more traumatic.
Because you have
impactful.
less access to your abstract thinking. Sometimes the solutions that your brain comes up with when you're in a lower brain state are not optimal. Because
they worked in the moment. They helped you.
They worked in the moment for survival, but when you put them out of context into a non threatening situation, you can have an inappropriate responses where, again, when you have someone who has PTSD, thing like that, they're having an inappropriate brain state in an opportune moment. It might have like a less desirable response, like it's activating parts of the brain that are out of context for that situation.
Yeah, out of context.
Just coming back to something you said, when you have memories that get encoded somatically or in your somatically means they get encoded in your actual like body
and physical feelings.
In your physical
too.
feelings, yeah. So, and there's been all kinds of research of like your brain has your whole body has memory, and those amygdala memories are
very somatic,
very like primal. They're visceral things, and a lot of cognitive and psychotherapy is the process by which you're moving those memories from a somatic memory, which is outside of your normal narrative. They almost get locked if you re-experience a somatic memory and it activates, you almost teleport back to that memory happening, and it's very, very fresh.
Reliving.
It's like it's happening in that moment.
Yeah.
And a big part of cognitive therapy and psychotherapy is to move that memory from a somatic experience into your hippocampal narrative memory, so it becomes part of your story. And the more you assimilate that very visceral trauma or experience, whatever it may be, into your narrative, then that's how you can start to, it becomes a more normative memory as part of your story. And that is a gross oversimplification of that process. It can be,
but it's a great way to describe it.
It can be incredibly difficult, but there are ways to even help that along. And if you know the process, I find that incredibly powerful. Just to know that that's the process that's going on is super helpful. And you want to have a coherent, cogent narrative of your life.
It needs to make sense.
And it's got to make sense. And it really matters of like, okay, what got me here? And it's a lot about the stories you tell yourself and all of that. But, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's useful. And I like the description of moving it from a somatic memory into a hippocampal memory where it's part of your narrative. So, and that's what, when you relive an event, that's what we talked about PTSD. If you're reliving a moment, your body literally feels like it's happening. Whatever happened is happening all over again. So I'm sure at some point after you rolled your car when you were 16, you felt the same feelings, like the stress in your body, whatever, if you were clenching or whatever happened. I'm sure you relived those moments until you were able to move that from a physical somatic memory to a hippocampal narrative memory.
The only thing that's still sensitive about that experience when I talk about it is the moment right when I lost control. Yeah. It's just that moment of it dropping out and you're like, boo.
Yeah.
So I can think about it if I stay on the fringes of it, but if I actually like think, I can still feel it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's where it's like, ooh.
It's very deeply encoded.
So, but it used to be more than just that feeling, and now it's just that little moment, which is it's fine.
That's great. Yeah.
So,
very cool. Well, and that's why I also really like we'll end on this here. I think that it's so useful to have an understanding that this is going on in your brain, in your body. It's not just that you're crazy or something's wrong with you or, oh, I'm just emotional and I can't help it. Or, there's a reason. When you have the ability to understand why you're feeling what you're feeling, even just from a neuroscience perspective of these 5 little brain states, it can be so freeing, so empowering to understand, wow, there's a reason in my brain that this is happening. My body's trying to help me.
Right.
I'm so big. I try to help my clients understand that your body is trying to help you. Everything that's going on, even if you have a really negative symptom, your body is trying to help you. Your body's not the enemy. There's this big shift I've seen in alternative health and some other health fields where it's like, well, my body's attacking me with autoimmune condition. My body's attacking me, my body. But you are your body. You can't separate the two. When you separate the two, you're dead.
Right.
No one knows what happens after that, right?
Yeah.
So you are a part of your body. And the more you can kind of connect your brain and your body all together to be one you, right? A whole unit, the better it is. The better you feel in your skin, the more courage and confidence you've got as a person, the more you're able to kind of go after your goals and achieve your goals because you've been unified to yourself, right? You've got personal power and understanding and care for yourself. It's not like, oh, this dumb body of mine, why is it not cooperating? I used to think that about myself. I would get these terrible migraines. I wouldn't be able to see for days. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed for days and sometimes even weeks. Like, what is wrong with my body? My body sucks.
Yeah.
This is terrible. Come on, get with the picture, body. Like, my brain and my body were separate, but they're not.
Right.
The more you have context to understand and the more you can kind of bring those areas together, the better you are, the better you're going to feel, the easier it is going to be for you to live your life and do all the things that you want to do. Right? So understanding the context, brain states, You can change them. You can move through them. You can get to from the bottom of your brain all the way back up to the top of your brain with relative ease once you know how and once you've practiced it. You've rehearsed it a bunch of times.
Yeah. And I just really liked what you just touched on, and that I've heard you say this a bunch about food. Like an Oreo is just an Oreo. Yeah. There's no moral
standing with it.
It's morally ambiguous. So it's not the food is the food. Your body has a reaction to it, but it's not like that Oreo is bad.
Right.
It's just a thing. It doesn't have any emotions. It's not actually like doing things. The same is true because I think with the brain states, as we move into this next episode, we're going to talk about what is a more optimal time to be in a certain brain state. There are times where you want to be in a lower brain state that are completely appropriate. It's more of, and there's nothing like morally wrong with any one brain. I just wanted to kind of detach I
think that's great too.
Some of the guilt and shame about, oh, she's so emotional or he's so emotional. It's like, well, in what context? Like there's nothing wrong with being emotional. It's when there's times you really want to feel your emotions.
Absolutely.
That's they all have it has a purpose. So, and particularly with a lot of the way culture's going, there's a lot of talking of mindfulness. And I think the upper tier of the brain of the prefrontal gets a lot of attention as far as that's the optimal place you want to be, but even that's not true. It's
most of the time, for a lot of contexts, that's the best. But you're right. I don't want to vilify any one of these brain states.
That's a good word, vilify,
because they do serve a purpose.
Yeah,
just like food. I mean, it serves a purpose even in being enjoyable. Sugar has a really bad rap right now, is not evil in and of itself. It's not bad. It's just sugar. And it's exactly what you said when it's applied out of context. When you eat 5 buckets of sugar out of context, right? That's not what it was designed for or useful for.
Right.
So, and it's the same with the brain states. You move through them to help you throughout your life. And when you have the ability, you feel like you're in the driver's seat, to go along with this car analogy we're talking about. You feel like you're in the driver's seat and you have more control about your brain states when you know, I'm going into a stressful situation. I don't want to feel super emotional. I'm going to practice regulating and staying cognitive, right? That is great. When you're going into an emotional situation, your sister's having a baby. You want to feel your emotions. It's great. It's fantastic. Let yourself be in that brain state.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. And know that if things go south, you can go down appropriately, but that just gives you more, I love this phrase, personal power. You get to be in the driver's seat. You're not necessarily feeling like you're at the whim of your emotions going crazy.
Right. Sweet. Well, I think we nailed it.
Yeah,
that was good.
Episode.
Good job, sweetie. Thank you for bringing all that in and kind of walking us through it from your end. I'm very pumped for the next episode we're going to do, which is about hopefully we did a good job of laying the groundwork for what a brain state is and how that works. And then, as I said before, we're going to be talking about how to regulate, how to get out of a bad spot when you're in a bbad spot, and then how to stay out of a bad spot when you're in a good spot.
Right, so you don't go down into a bad spot.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing your analogy too. It's a very, you've committed to most of your hippocampus, but like a vulnerable place to show this part of yourself. So that's great to give that illustration. I think it's great for people to see real life examples, and they can kind of feel that a little bit with you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I've got a few more good ones that we'll talk about later, but cool. Well, thank you, sweetie. That was awesome. We'll see you guys in the outro.
And that is all for us today, guys. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. We really enjoyed recording it for you. It's one of my favorite things ever to talk about, so I hope that you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to seeing y'all in the part 2 of this episode. For show notes, you can go to our website, thepainterandthepixie.com, and to follow us for show updates and fun other little tidbits, you can go to our Instagram page, which is at The Painter and the Pixie.
Yep. And that is going to do it for us this week, folks. Again, as we mentioned before, next week we will have part 2, which I think is even more fun
it is.
than what we just talked about, which is actually how to regulate. We're going to talk about the practical ways to do it, what are some of my favorite ways, things that work for me, things that work for Serina. And her and I kind of come at it from a different perspective, so I think it'll actually
It's really cool.
Be useful to hear how we both kind of interpret those things and how we've kind of developed it into our own set of skills and and how we used to regulate these crazy brains of ours. So
so we'll see you guys in the next episode.
yeah, until then, y'all be kind, and we'll see you next week. Peace.
Bye.
Amazing.